The hum of the servers was a familiar lullaby, a constant, low-frequency thrum that had been the background music to my entire adult life. From my chair, I could see the whole network rendered in pulsing, color-coded light on the main monitor array. Green for stable, yellow for high load, red for critical error. It was a sea of tranquil green. I was watching the data flow for a dozen high-rise buildings across the city, monitoring everything from HVACs and elevator heuristics to network bandwidth allocation and security authorizations. My system kept the glass and steel hearts of the city beating. A notification blinked in the corner of my screen, a proximity alert, a specific RFID tag I had programmed years ago, one I hadn't seen since I was a child, had just passed through the main entrance of the building I was in, the flagship property of a multinational corporation. The tag was on a keychain, a silly souvenir from Paris. My mother's keychain. I leaned back, my chair groaning in the quiet of the control room. The system I was monitoring wasn't just for a dozen buildings. This one, the one beneath my feet, was special. It was the crown jewel, and I owned it. Not the corporation inside it, not the tenants on its 50 floors. I owned the building itself. The bones, the bricks, the fiber, the power. They were just long-term, high-paying tenants. A sharp, imperious rap on the glass door of the control room shattered the calm. I didn't turn. I watched the security feed on a secondary monitor. It was her. Older, of course, with laugh lines that hadn't been there when she'd left, and a man I didn't recognize standing possessively beside her. He was tanned, wearing a linen suit that screamed, "I winter in the tropics." My mother, however, looked exactly as I remembered, in spirit, impatient, entitled, and radiating an aura that the world owed her its immediate and undivided attention. She rapped on the glass again, harder this time. I swiveled my chair slowly, letting the hydraulics hiss, and met her gaze. I didn't smile. I just watched her through the reinforced glass. She gestured impatiently, a flick of the wrist that meant open up. I pressed a small, unmarked button on my console. The magnetic lock clicked, and the door swung open. "Well, it's about time," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the climate-controlled air. She strode in as if she owned the place, her companion following like a smug shadow. "I mean, really. Do you know who I am?" I kept my voice perfectly level, the same calm, modulated tone I used for reporting critical failures to panicked executives. "I do. You're 2 hours early for your appointment." She scoffed, a little puff of air. "Appointment? Honey, I don't need an appointment." She gestured around the room, at the millions of dollars of blinking hardware that represented my life's work. "This is all very impressive. A bit much for a hobby, don't you think? Look, I'm back now. We're back." She hooked a thumb toward the linen suit. "This is Jean-Pierre. We're moving back into the penthouse, so thank you for keeping an eye on things." She gave me a dismissive little pat on the shoulder. "Your services are no longer required. You're fired." The word hung in the chilled air, absurd and utterly meaningless. Fired. It was the word a boss used on a subordinate, a superior on an inferior. It was a word predicated on a power dynamic that simply did not exist between us. The half-dozen technicians and junior administrators in the main office outside the glass walls of my control room had all fallen silent. I could feel their eyes on us. They knew who I was. They knew who signed their paychecks. They knew whose name was on the deed to the ground 50 floors beneath us. They had just witnessed a chihuahua try to fire a lion. My mother, however, was blissfully, arrogantly ignorant. She saw a child who had been playing with toys, and was now being told by the adult that playtime was over. Her partner, Jean-Pierre, smirked, a look of holy victory on his face. He thought they had won. He thought they had just secured a free penthouse apartment in the most desirable building in the city. I looked from her beaming, condescending face to his smug one. I let a beat of silence pass, then another. And in that silence, I made a decision. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't explain. I wouldn't pull out the legal documents that proved my sole, irrevocable ownership of this entire structure, an ownership granted to me by my grandmother's will after my mother had abandoned me at age 11 with $2 and a note that said, "Be good." No, I would do something far more effective. I would agree. But before I did, I looked past them, past the glass, and into the lens of the security camera I knew was recording everything. And I thought to myself, if you, the person watching this unfold, want to see what happens when an entitled freeloader who abandoned her child tries to reclaim a life she forfeited decades ago, you might want to drop a like on this video. And you should definitely hit that subscribe button because you're about to watch a carefully constructed empire of arrogance completely and utterly implode. I turned my gaze back to my mother, a faint, placid smile on my lips. Okay? I said, my voice soft. I understand. I'm fired. The relief on her face was immediate and palpable. She beamed, her victory complete. Good. I knew you'd be reasonable. She patted my shoulder again, a gesture of finality. Now, if you'll just hand over the master keys and the access codes, Jen, Pierre and I would like to go upstairs and settle in. I nodded slowly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single, sleek black keycard. It had no markings. It was the physical master key, capable of overriding any lock in the building. I held it out to her. She snatched it from my hand, a triumphant glint in her eye. Thank you, she said, her tone dripping with fake magnanimity. We'll be sure to have you over for dinner sometime. After we've redecorated, of course. I stood up from my chair. I didn't look at the monitors. I didn't look at my staff, who were watching in stunned silence. I walked towards the door, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the quiet room. As I passed the main network console, I casually picked up a thick legal document that was waiting for my signature. The annual renewal of the multi-million-dollar lease for the corporation that occupied floors 1 through 48. I tucked it under my arm, unsigned. I walked out of the control room, out of the main office, and into the private elevator that serviced only my office and the penthouse. But I didn't go up, I went down. Down to the lobby, through the soaring marble expanse, and out into the bustling city. My mother thought she had won. She thought she had taken back control. She had no idea that she had just willingly and enthusiastically pressed the self-destruct button on her entire world. The show was about to begin. My lair, as some of my staff jokingly called it, wasn't a dark, ominous server room. It was my apartment, a quiet, minimalist space 3 blocks away from the building I owned. My home office was a sanctuary of order and control. One wall was a seamless bank of monitors, a direct, encrypted feed from my building's central nervous system. I sat down in my leather chair, the familiar scent of comfort. The revenge I was about to enact wasn't emotional. It wasn't sabotage. It was simply professional. It was a systematic rollback of uncontracted services and amenities, executed with the cold, dispassionate precision of a database administrator revoking user privileges. My mother had fired me. She had terminated our informal agreement. I was simply complying with her request, to the letter of the law. I pulled up the building's master control interface, a proprietary piece of software I had designed myself. My fingers danced across the keyboard, a familiar rhythm. The first few steps would be subtle, designed to create confusion and a slow, creeping sense of dread. Step 1: reverting privileges. My mother now held a master key card. In her mind, that card was a symbol of absolute power. But the power wasn't in the card. It was in the software that decided what the card could do. I accessed the security hierarchy. Her card, RFID tag 7B4 Alpha, was currently assigned to the owner profile, with unrestricted, Tier 1 access to everything. With a few clicks, I created a new profile. Standard tenant unverified. I dragged her RFID tag into the new profile. The change was instantaneous. The master key in her purse was now, for all intents and purposes, a guest pass. It would open the front door of the building and the door to the penthouse apartment. Nothing more. The private elevators, the executive gym, the rooftop garden, the secure parking garage, the express service lifts, all of it would now deny her access with a polite, impersonal beep. Step 2: revoking access to essential equipment. The penthouse was a magnificent space, but it was also a complex one, filled with integrated systems that required my network to function. I pulled up the schematics for the 50th floor. I started with the non-essentials: the integrated sound system, the automated blinds, the smart lighting controlled by voice command. I severed their connection to the central server. They would still function manually, of course, but the seamless, luxurious convenience was gone. Then, I moved to the freight elevators. The penthouse was currently empty of their belongings. They would need to move their things in. The main passenger elevators had strict rules against being used for furniture. Access to the building's 3 massive freight elevators was a service that had to be booked and authorized through my office. I flagged my mother's new standard tenant profile as ineligible for freight elevator access. They could try to bring their furniture up through the lobby and into the passenger lifts, but building security, my security, would politely but firmly stop them. Step 3: the big one. This was the move that would transform inconvenience into genuine crisis. It wasn't about turning off the power or the water. That was crude, and it would affect the rest of the building. My methods were more surgical. I went into the bandwidth allocation protocol for the entire building. My corporate tenants paid a fortune for guaranteed, redundant, high-speed fiber optic internet. The penthouse had its own dedicated gigabit fiber line, a personal luxury I had enjoyed. It was a line that was, legally, under my name and my account. My mother had fired me. I was no longer providing my services. I logged into the ISP's corporate portal. I found the account for Penthouse Suite 5000. And I canceled it. Not throttled, not downgraded, canceled. The termination of service would take effect within the hour. No internet, no television, no streaming. The digital heart of the penthouse would simply stop beating. And then, for the final touch, I accessed the HVAC controls. The penthouse had its own dedicated climate control unit, a powerful system for the sprawling space. It was tied into the building's central network for efficiency monitoring. I didn't turn it off. I simply removed it from the network. It would now operate in standalone mode, meaning any adjustments would have to be made manually, from a service panel in a utility closet. And, more importantly, any faults or errors would no longer be automatically reported to my control center. It was now an island, and islands can get very hot or very cold very, very quickly. I leaned back, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over me. The trap was set. The beauty of it was that none of this was illegal or even malicious. It was bureaucracy. It was policy. I was simply enforcing the rules that my mother, in her arrogance, had just invoked. She wanted me gone. I was gone, and she was about to discover what life was like without the invisible infrastructure I had provided for her. The first report came an hour later, not from my mother, but from the building manager, a perpetually stressed man named David. He called my private line. Boss, he started, his voice strained. We have a bit of a situation in the main lobby. I feigned ignorance. What kind of situation, David? Well, there's a woman and a man here, with a moving truck parked in the fire lane. They're trying to bring a very large, very expensive-looking sofa through the main entrance. Security stopped them, of course, and informed them they need to use a freight elevator. The woman, well, she's not taking it well. I could hear a faint, shrill shouting in the background. And what did she say? I asked, keeping my tone placid. She said she's the new owner. She waved a black keycard at my head security officer and demanded he let her pass. The card doesn't grant freight access, of course. When he told her that, she threatened to have him fired. I almost smiled. And did she mention who would be firing him? There was a pause. She said she would. It's your mother, isn't it? David knew my history. Not all of it, but enough. Yes, David, I said calmly. It is. Follow protocol. No unauthorized use of passenger elevators for moving. No exceptions. Right, boss? Will do. He sounded relieved to have a clear directive. The chaos was just beginning. From my monitors, I watched as my mother, her face a mask of furious indignation, tried her keycard on the private elevator. Beep. Access denied. She tried it on the door to the executive gym. Beep. Access denied. I watched through the security feed as she and Pierre finally gave up on the sofa, leaving the movers standing awkwardly by their truck, and took the public elevator up to the penthouse. I saw them enter, and a few minutes later I saw Pierre stomping around the living room, jabbing at his phone, his face growing redder by the second. The internet was gone. The panic began to escalate. An hour after that, I got a call from the head of IT for the corporation that leased floors 1 through 48. Hey, she said, quick question. We're trying to finalize our lease renewal for next year. I've been sending emails to your primary account, but they're bouncing, and the renewal paperwork is still sitting in your outbox unsigned. Is everything okay? Everything is fine, Maria. I replied smoothly. There's been a change in ownership, so the terms of the lease are being re-evaluated. I'll be in touch with a new proposal shortly. A change in ownership? She asked, her voice sharp with alarm. A multi-billion-dollar corporation doesn't like uncertainty. I wasn't aware the building was for sale. It wasn't? I said, but circumstances have changed. Don't worry, Maria. Your new landlord will be very accommodating. I hung up, leaving her to stew in the corporate anxiety that I had just manufactured. But the masterstroke was yet to come. The building I owned was located in the city's most competitive financial district. Bandwidth was lifeblood, and physical proximity to the stock exchange's servers was a multi-million-dollar advantage. My building had some of the best fiber infrastructure in the city. The corporation in my building had a primary competitor, A rival firm that was located 3 blocks away in an older, less technologically advanced building. I knew their CEO. We'd had lunch a few times. He had always been envious of my building's capabilities. I picked up the phone and dialed his direct line. "James," I said when he answered. "I have a sudden and unexpected opening in my building, the penthouse suite. And, more importantly, I have a dedicated, high-capacity fiber optic line that is now available. I also have an entire floor of premium office space that might be coming onto the market very, very soon." There was a pregnant pause on the other end of the line. "How soon is very, very soon?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "Let's just say the current tenant's lease is not being renewed," I said. "I can sell you the exclusive rights to the penthouse, which you can convert into an executive suite, and I can lease you the entire 48th floor. And I can sell you the dedicated fiber line, giving you a 2-millisecond trading advantage over your competition." My competition, of course, being the corporation currently residing in my building. "My God," he breathed. "What would a deal like that cost?" "Less than you'd think," I said, "and it would be devastating to your rivals. I'm drawing up the paperwork now. I could have it on your desk by the end of the day." This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about business. This was my prime payback. I was taking the assets my mother thought she was entitled to and leveraging them in a brilliant, proactive business move that would not only solidify my own financial future, but would also create a seismic shift in the city's financial landscape. My mother hadn't just lost a free apartment. She had inadvertently handed me the opportunity for a corporate coup. The final confrontation was not what she expected. There was no screaming match in the lobby. There were no tears. It was quiet, formal, and utterly devastating. 3 days after her triumphant return, I received a summons. Not from her, but from her father. My grandfather. A man I hadn't seen in 20 years, the patriarch of the family, the one who had enabled my mother's behavior her entire life. The meeting was to be held in the boardroom of his law firm, a place of old money and quiet, ruthless power. I arrived precisely on time, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit. I was no longer the quiet IT guy in the control room. I was the owner of one of the city's most valuable pieces of real estate, and I looked the part. I walked into the boardroom. My grandfather sat at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, looking grim. My mother was beside him, looking haggard and furious. Jean-Pierre was next to her, his tan faded, his linen suit rumpled. He looked like a man who hadn't had a decent internet connection in 3 days. A team of stern-faced lawyers flanked them. "Thank you for coming," my grandfather said, his voice a low rumble. "We have a great deal to discuss." I didn't sit. I stood at the opposite end of the table, placing my briefcase down with a soft click. "I don't believe we do," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I believe everything is already settled." My mother shot to her feet. "Settled? Nothing is settled. You've locked us out of our own home. The power keeps flickering. The water is cold. Our key doesn't work anywhere. You sabotaged us?" I looked at her. My expression unreadable. "I did not sabotage you. I complied with your directive. You fired me. You terminated our arrangement. Therefore, I ceased to provide the services that were part of that arrangement. The key you have opens the door to the apartment, as it should. It does not grant you access to executive amenities because you are not an executive. The utilities are in your name now, or they should be. It is your responsibility to ensure the bills are paid. The internet was cancelled because the account was in my name, and since I am no longer in your employ, I am no longer obligated to provide you with my personal internet service." I spoke slowly, deliberately, as if explaining a complex technical problem to a child. "This is ridiculous," my grandfather interjected. "This building, this apartment, it has been in our family for generations." "That is incorrect," I said, opening my briefcase. I pulled out a single, thick document and slid it down the polished table. It stopped directly in front of him. "That is a copy of my grandmother's will. As you know, after my mother left for Europe with her then boyfriend, leaving me an 11-year-old child in my grandmother's care with nothing but $2, and a signed letter relinquishing her parental responsibilities, my grandmother became my legal guardian. When she passed away 10 years ago, she left the building and all associated assets to me. Solely, irrevocably. It is not family property, it is my property." The silence in the room was absolute. My mother's face had gone pale. Jean-Pierre was staring at her, a look of dawning horror on his face. He had been played not by me but by her. I wasn't finished. I pulled another document from my briefcase. "This," I said, holding it up as a signed and executed contract. I have sold the exclusive rights to the penthouse suite and its dedicated fiber optic line to the CEO of a rival investment firm. He is very excited to move in. And this? I produced a third document, as a notice of non-renewal of the lease for your primary corporate tenant, the company that has been paying you millions of dollars a year in rent. As the new owner of the penthouse and a major new tenant, my new partner has requested that their chief rival no longer be housed in the same building. I have, of course, agreed. Their lease expires in 60 days. They will be vacating the premises. My grandfather's face, which had been grim, was now ashen. He understood the financial cataclysm that I had just described. They hadn't just lost a penthouse. They had lost their golden goose. And finally, I said, my voice dropping to an almost conversational tone, this is a formal notice of eviction. I slid a simple, standard legal form across the table to my mother. As you are not a contracted tenant and have no legal right to reside on my property, you have 30 days to vacate the penthouse. After that, you will be considered to be trespassing, and I will have you removed by the authorities. I closed my briefcase. The consequences of your actions, mother, are irreversible. You wanted me. Gone. I am gone. And I have taken my property with me. I turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind a tableau of shattered arrogance and financial ruin. The fallout was exactly as I had planned. The corporation, faced with the loss of their prestigious headquarters, scrambled to find new premises, a move that cost them tens of millions in logistics and lost productivity. My grandfather's law firm lost its biggest client. My mother and Jean-Pierre were forced to move into a small, rented apartment in a distant suburb. Their relationship, built on a foundation of his money and her promised inheritance, crumbled within a month. He left, and she was forced to get a job for the first time in 30 years. Working as a cashier in a supermarket, I heard she was reassigned to the corporate equivalent of Siberia the night shift. My new client, the rival firm, thrived. They moved into the 48th floor and converted the penthouse into a stunning executive lounge and conference center, a symbol of their victory over their competitors. The building was more profitable than ever. About 6 months later, I was doing a final inspection of the new fiber optic installation in the penthouse. The new CEO, James, was there, looking out over the city from the floor-to-ceiling windows. It's an incredible view, he said, turning to me. He wasn't smiling. He was looking at me with a kind of profound respect. You know, he said, I've been in this business for 40 years. I've seen hostile takeovers, corporate espionage, backstabbing of every kind, but I have never seen a move as quiet, as elegant, and as utterly devastating as the one you pulled. You didn't just win, you changed the entire game. He held out his hand. Thank you, he said, for everything. I shook his hand, the grip firm and respectful. I looked out at the city, my city, the network of lights and data and life that I understood so intimately. My mother had left me with $2 and a deep, gnawing fear of instability. I had used that fear to build a fortress of quiet competence, a place where the power didn't come from loud voices or entitled demands, but from the silent, invisible systems that hold everything together. Always know where the power truly comes from. Quiet moves always beat loud egos. Thanks for listening. See you next time.